जमकर बर्फबारी हुई। अगर हम मैदानी इलाकों की बात करेंगे तो मैदानी इलाकों में भी बर्फबारी अभी भी जारी है और आप देख सकते हैं कि यहाँ पे जो है हार्वेस्टिंग का जो सीज़न है वो पीक पे है। तो हम दिखाना चाहेंगे अभी भी जो है पेड़ों पे जो है काफ़ी सेब मौजूद है, जिसकी वजह से यहाँ के किसान परेशान हैं। क्योंकि हमने कई लोगों से बात करने की कोशिश की, अभी भी बर्फ़ जारी है, लेकिन बेशतर जो लोग हैं वो अपने घरों में ही है। कई लोग ऐसे ये चाहते हैं कि सरकार को चाहिए कि जो गरीब एरियाज़ है, अगर हम शुक्रान ज़िला के पहाड़ी एरियाज़ की बात करेंगे तो उनको कम से कम यहाँ पे तखमीना लगाया जाए और जो है टीम जो एग्रीकल्चर डिपार्टमेंट या हार्टिकल्चर डिपार्टमेंट जो उनकी टीमें इन इलाकों में भेजी जाए।
And students in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil protested against the candidacy of Jair Bolsonaro in the upcoming elections on the 30th October. Students took to the streets to protest against the cuts in educational budgets. The protests were led by National Students Union. Demonstrators marched, chanted, holding flags and placards. Despite constant missile and drone attacks by Russia on Ukrainian cities, Ukrainians have refused to pause their lives. The residents continued their daily activities despite the constant bombing threats, calling it a constant state of affairs now. And in Seen and Seen today, viral video captures rare glass octopus in all its glory.
Namaste and welcome to this edition of The Right Stand. Ladies and gentlemen, there are two nations who have declared each other as their prime adversary. China has identified America as its prime adversary, America is vice versa. And they believe that each wants to unseat the other as the hegemonistic force that controls or dictates, dominates the world. So if it is America which is currently doing the same, China wants to unseat it. And on the other hand, China believes that America is wanting to disrupt its own plans. Now, in a situation like this, if you have a scenario where both these nations are actually batting for a country whom India has identified as an enemy and a bane for on its growth path, or perhaps the biggest hurdle on its growth path, then we should have a serious concern. We should want to ask what is happening here? Ho kya raha hai? Because China repeatedly is batting for terrorists operating on India, on Pakistan, from Pakistani soil against the very interests of India, and it's continuing to block it, and it's done it in succession in the recent past. And on the other hand, the Americans, after calling out the Pakistanis, are now handing them out tolls, facilitating a loan from IMF, then to entire upgrade and service the F-16s, and now perhaps an emergence out of the FATF grey list. So both China and America are flanking Pakistan. What's in it for India? Should India be worried? Or perhaps does this clearly outline two ways to look at it? One, that we have to walk our own path and strategic autonomy will come at a particular cost. Or don't look at this, be myopic, don't look at the nearer picture or the short picture, don't look at the longer picture. These are a few small hurdles in the longer end game which is beneficial. At a time when the world is going through turmoil, be it the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the tensions in Taiwan, Liz Truss resigning in 45 days, we are having these aspects where a few hawks who want to bait Bharat will turn around and say these are all strategic setbacks. But are they focusing perhaps on the minutiae, on a very, very smaller picture and not looking at the entire scenario at a bird's eye view from 30,000 feet up? Let's try and understand this and let's see what's happening. First up, you have scenarios where America and China have come out and backed Pakistan. What has America done? America has backed Pakistan at the FATF, and relief from the grey list has come through. What has China done? China has blocked terrorist listing at the UNSC, and they've done it repeatedly. Then, the other aspect. The envoy has called Pak-occupied Kashmir as Azad Kashmir, sovereign Indian territory. An ambassador of the USA goes there and calls it Azad Kashmir and tends to get away with it. India has raised strong objections, but is that enough? Somewhere you feel that we need to show the might of Bharat a little more. On the other hand, you have the Chinese who are backing Pakistan on a global fora, wanting and urging nations which are under its sway to increasingly engage with Pakistan and economically empower it again. Instant approval to IMF loans happened. Biggest bilateral creditor and CPEC investment is coming in from China. So you see two adversaries who tend to be converging on this entity which has been a consistent pest for us for a long time. Then, if you look at some of the other aspects that stand out with both China and America, the F-16 sustenance package happens. It's the biggest supplier of nuclear arms support, the bedrock of Pakistani nuclear technology. Everything emanates from China. Afghanistan intel is being shared with Pakistan on a regular basis, and US is actually facilitating a Pakistan indirect control of the Taliban and Afghanistan. Terrorists, designated terrorists, are sitting in government in Afghanistan at this point, and the America has not done anything about it. And of course, China comes out and gives it armed support to its all-weather strategic partner. Now, in such a scenario, these shifting geosands, what does it mean for Bharat? What does it mean for India is a question that we'll dwell upon this evening, this Friday evening, ladies and gentlemen. Park off the FATF grey list is the hashtag, but we are looking at the bigger dynamic. Ambassador Parthasarathy, former diplomat with us, Dr. Tara Karta, former Director, National Security Council Secretariat with us, Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow, ORF and Strategic Affairs Expert with us, and Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, Senior Fellow with the Vivekananda Foundation is also with us. Namaste to the lady and the gentleman. Festive greetings. We are on the cusp of the Deepavali weekend, but is it really Deepavali for us strategically? Rakesh Sharma ji, I'm going to start with you, General Saab. So please tell us, and let's open this up. And then I'll bring in Ambassador Parthasarathy, Sushant Sareen and Dr. Tara Karta. Yes, General Sharma.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and happy Diwali to you and to all your listeners. Now, I wish to state it that it's all a question of American interests in the issue that you are building up. If you go back to last week of July, Wendy Sherman spoke to General Bajwa. Then thereafter, the Central Army Commander General Michael Kurela spoke to General Bajwa, and on 1st of August, within 4 or 5 days, just before that, 31st, again, General Bajwa rang up Wendy Sherman and said, release the IMF loan, and 1st of August, lo and behold, they killed Zawahiri. Obviously, this all can't be coincidences in 5 days, when twice General Bajwa spoke to Wendy Sherman, and once he spoke to the Central Commander of General Michael Kurela, and then there was the assassination of Zawahiri. The IMF loan was passed, and all was goody in no time. And then, you have this F-16 sustenance package also coming in through. So there are services being rendered by Pakistan to the Americans. It's all a question of the national interest, and to do their national interest, whichever way the Americans wanted, they will have the same relations with Pakistan as they used to have. It's a question of dhoop chhaw. Today is good, tomorrow is bad. Then thereafter, recently, President Biden made a statement against Pakistan. So this is all a question of making a sine curve. And I think finally the Americans understand that the geostrategic location of Pakistan is exceedingly important to them, especially because of the Afghanistan being close by and Iran being neighbors, and they will retain relationship that they have with Pakistan. And speaking about China, but China is a different matter altogether. They have relationship with Pakistan. They also have issues on ETIM and the 15 other organizations that they have who are the kind of terrorist organization based in Kunduz and other states, other provinces of Afghanistan. So they have to maintain relations with Pakistan and Afghanistan to make sure that their own underbelly is not being hit hard. So it's all everybody playing to his own interests, just simply own interests.
No, they simply own interest means India's interests are being compromised. I've got friends of mine and viewers who are watching this broadcast, and they are quoting Henry Kissinger, who says to be America's enemy is dangerous, but to be America's friend is fatal. That was Henry Kissinger. The other aspect they're saying is Pakistan is getting all this pampering, and they're getting multiple people because it's geostrategically located. A nation can bend over this way, bend over that way. Everybody knows it's a bane, it's a problem, but they'll still nurture it, and then they'll still say this is like a child that throws a tantrum. So you don't like it, but you give it the most attention, Ambassador Parthasarathy. But at what cost for us as a country?
Look, I think you should look at China and US not together, but in separate terms. China has a long-term interest in the containment of India.
Right.
And come what may, it will assist Pakistan. It is the predominant power which has helped Pakistan to go nuclear. Pakistani nuclear weapons are of Chinese designs. Their missiles are of Chinese designs. Everything designed to hit India. So let's get that very clear, that Pakistan is China's main interest for low-cost containment of India. Come to the US. The US is slightly different. By and large, one can say that there is now, at least with the large number of people who are in Silicon Valley, a better understanding and appreciation of India. Coming to Biden himself, now that's a unique situation. You have a president who has a great fascination for the Pakistan army. I've traced it back to even 2011. When he traveled all the way from Rawalpindi to from Islamabad to Rawalpindi, some 45 minutes by car, just to call, mind you, call on General Kayani, the army chief. It's unheard of a vice president calling on General Kayani, on a general. Then he goes a step further and invites General Rahil Sharif to the White House. So Biden is a class act and a class apart. That's my view, and I've been very frank about it. The question then arises that Biden's dealing with India.
Correct.
He needs us to deal with China.
Right.
But he has his own fascinations for the Pakistanis. Right at the present moment, he's provided $450 million for Pakistan. But Pakistan has done something for him. They have joined with the British to airlift huge amounts of weapons for the Ukrainian government. It's going to anger the Russians, but it has been done. And that's the doing of the genius of General Bajwa. So the present situation you are faced with is a US president who has a peculiar love for the Pakistani military. That's why he is ever so fond of even General Bajwa in these days, that the Defense Secretary receives General Bajwa not in his office but at the gates of the Pentagon. So you are into this peculiar situation. But Biden is going to dish out his $450 million to Pakistan for military aid. That is Biden. But I would be careful in equating him with the Chinese. Right now, their interests seem to converge when it comes to India. But their interests are very, very diverse. And a large section knows they need India to balance. And therefore, you're into a geopolitical situation right now when Biden wants to get hold of the Pakistanis to feed weapons to his Ukrainian allies. And they all become great chums. And that too, not the entire Pakistan establishment, but General Bajwa, who's responsible. And the British joined in this effort. So you're into this complex situation. I think we should just play it cool, because the Russians will do what they have to do. And the Russians are not going to easily forgive Pakistan for supplying weapons when in such a large scale that it requires British Air Force aircraft to fly them to Ukraine.
Correct, because they have been reportedly taking off the air bases that Pakistan has given off, and perhaps somewhere giving up Zawahiri, and then of course allowing their air bases to be used for carting these arms to Ukraine. These are things which everybody has taken note of. But what stands out is, and Pathikrit Payan is watching the broadcast, and Sushantji and Dr. Tarakarta as I come across to you, he's saying that the irony, Dr. Tarakarta, is that US wants to blacklist Talha Saeed, knowing fully well he's a terror product of the Pak deep state, but they have facilitated Pak's emergence out of the FATF grey list. So what kind of game is being played here? And for us, how do we look at all of this? Because on the other hand, US is saying we want to engage with you on Quad. So is US going to think that they can use India to try and counter China or put a leash on China, and to try and continue to keep us in a flux? They will continue to engage with Pakistan. So is this the game that they're going to play? And are we at a strategic disadvantage because we are having enemies on two fronts, adversaries on two fronts?
Actually, Anand, I would argue that the US has actually never really left Pakistan. They've stopped arms aid under Trump. Okay, that is all. But if you look at the US aid website, it says very clearly, it says Pakistan remains one of the largest recipient of US aid. 7.7 billion in the last 10 years. So where is the US left? So it is true, definitely, that if indeed Zawahiri was given to them by the Pakistanis, and I honestly don't see anybody else doing that, then I wouldn't put the F-16 states, the refurbishment as a very top priority. I mean, it's just something which in fact they are under contract to do. Let's face it. It's part of their contract. And it's not a big deal. It does not increase Pakistan's capability. We would much rather they didn't. That's a different issue. But those are the facts on the ground. If that's what they got for Zawahiri, well, that's peanuts. But the fact remains that in terms of, I'm saying China is sort of barring these terrorists, and they know the US backs us on the terrorist front, and China, that UN. And the joke of the whole thing is, in the SCO meeting recently in Samarkand, the terrorism is mentioned 31 times.
Yeah.
So what are you doing, right? So, and the funniest part is the second guy, who's also part of the listing, who's also the head of the local international head of the Falai Insaniyat, is operating in Myanmar.
Yeah.
That's just next to China. I mean, have fun, guys. That's all I can say.
Because do they think, Sushantji, the Chinese think that these are pests they can quash whenever at will? Right now they need them because these are also supplying them mercenaries to guard some of their CPEC projects and boots on ground where they cannot have soldiers and military presence. Is that the case? Why is this happening? And how do we negotiate this?
No, I don't think that's the reason why this is happening. One, I think we need to be very clear that most countries in the world call something terrorism when it affects them. When it does not affect them, it's not terrorism.
Okay.
Please remember that the Americans, for example, in Syria and in some of the other countries in the Middle East, have supported what would normally be categorized as terrorist groups, but they did that under the the label of national liberation. So one is, that's a very serious definitional problem. Secondly, interests of countries always trump their principles. So both with the Americans, the Chinese, of course, have no principles. For them, it's a pure and simple kind of a calculation. They don't think that the groups who are being designated as terrorists by the UN or are sought to be designated terrorists by the UN will actually pose any danger to Pakistan, because these are very loyal servants of the Pakistani state. The Lashkar-e-Taiba is the single most obedient organization as far as the Pakistani state is concerned. It has never done anything against the Pakistani state, always acted as an auxiliary.
Right.
So for the Chinese, blocking their designation is par for the course, especially because it has a dual benefit of socking India in the face. What does India do? We get a chance to sock it back to the Pakistanis, but we are very principled. We will stand on principle. We will not do anything against the Chinese when the UN HRC is trying to pass a resolution. Because, we are standing on a principle. That principle is worth nothing to nobody. Nothing. Absolutely zilch, right? But, with all due respect to my elder Ambassador Parthasarthi, I've never been able to understand this form of diplomacy from the Indian side. I think there is somewhere along the line, there is a slight amount of diffidence when it comes to the taking on the Chinese frontally, or at least talking it to them where we can.
Yeah.
So I think there is that problem out there. Part of it could be a calculation that we don't want to become America's cat's paw against China. We have very serious problems with the Chinese.
Yeah.
We would like to engage the Americans against the Chinese. But do we want to become America's Ukraine against China? I don't think we want to do that, right? And I don't think we should do that.
Correct.
And look at the way the West has used the Ukrainians. Okay, the Ukrainians have a legitimate cause to fight for. But look at the way the West orchestrated the whole thing. Again, they are paying their own price for what they have done. The unintended consequences are hitting them, but that's besides the point. Now, come to Pakistan, for example. So one is, of course, that the Chinese will keep providing cover fire to terrorists. The Chinese will keep supporting terrorists because they think that these guys suit their interests. But why are we even surprised by it? Unless, of course, we think that China is a country we can actually be friends with, and whatever nonsense their ambassador out here dishes out on Twitter and in the pamphlets which they distribute to pliable journalists, and the advertisements, 2-page advertisements they give to so-called Indian newspapers, which are, I think, more Chinese than Indian. Now, unless you're believing all of that crap, the fact of the matter remains that China is an enemy country, as is Pakistan, right?
Yes.
In the case of Pakistan, I think the American policy is again one of self-interest. One, I don't think that the $450 million package is a gift to Pakistan. The Pakistanis have to pay for it. Now, maybe the Americans write it off or give it gratis, I don't know. But as of now, the Pakistanis have to pay for it. Whether they have the money or not is another point. But more importantly, I think there are 3 considerations in the American resetting with Pakistan. One, I think it's socking it to India. It's telling India, okay, fine, you think you have strategic autonomy, so do we. Nothing concentrates the Indian mind more than American engagement with Pakistan. So maybe one is that. It's pure diplomatic gamesmanship and brinkmanship. The second is that the Americans feel that because they have a global footprint, they need to remain engaged with Pakistan at some level or the other. I don't think this relationship is going back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, or even the 80s. But I think they want to keep that relationship going, and whatever little crumbs they can throw at Pakistan, they will throw. And the third is the terrorism angle. But last point, Anand, I'll make is that, I don't think we need to be unduly worried. We, of course, have to increase our own national power and national strength. But I think it is very important to understand that, no amount of money that the Americans give to the Pakistanis is going to rescue that. Nobody can rescue that country. And at this point in time, when both Europe and America are reeling under recession, they have recessionary conditions, they have a huge protest taking place, and you have China in a lockdown again, and the Chinese have already lost tons of money in Pakistan. I don't think anybody is really going to be funding Pakistan, the way they had funded Pakistan in the past. So I think one flank of ours is covered. The other one we have to cover much better than what we have done so far.
Right. घुस के तो मारते हैं राकेश जी, जनरल साहब, बट द पॉइंट इज हमको घूम के बजाना भी चाहिए थोड़ा. हमको वी शुड टर्न अराउंड एंड शो द माइट ऑफ 25% of the world's population, the 5th largest economy in the world, when one envoy has the audacity to go ahead and call that place Pakistan occupied Kashmir as Azad Kashmir, and he tom-toms that narrative. He's an American envoy. Where is the diplomatic cost that we have exacted for that? Sometimes what one gets the feeling that we take it lying down. And they think कि हम इनको जितना बजाएंगे, ठीक है, थोड़ा सा फैल रहे हैं, चलो let's teach them a lesson, अब ये चुप हो जाएंगे. We should not give them that sense. Am I wrong to say that? And with the Chinese, they respect only might, sir. They respect only might. So we have to show them that we can really sock them in the face at various levels. General Saab, so what do we do? What should we do as a country? Should we just sit down, just raise a strong objection and keep quiet?
So these are actually the crux of the issues that must be being debated, are being debated across here. But I just take a step back and say that President Biden, then Senator Biden in 2008 was awarded Nishan-e Pakistan, the highest award. He and Lugar, They were both awarded this when President Zardari was at the helm of affairs, and the citation read that it is for consistent support of Pakistan. So the history goes back a longer time than the current affairs. So there is President Biden's relationship with Pakistan is not new. It's also when he was chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. So I mean, it's all continuation. The odd remarks that are there is to assuage some hobbies which we against on the other side. Now, having said that, answer your question, yes, we have issues with Pakistan. Actually, we should not think about Pakistan as a threat. We should think Pakistan more as a nuisance, as an irritant.
Yeah, best.
We should. Okay, that's the word you use. I would say that if it's a nuisance, let's not talk Pakistan as a threat. It gives it importance that Pakistan doesn't deserve to have the importance. When we are saying that the economically bad state, internally they are a bad state, we say to front threat. Pakistan is not a threat, and we should not deem it as a threat. We should handle it in that manner. China is another issue altogether. China is a threat. It's a short, mid-term, long-term threat. Even if you see the wordings of President Xi Jinping in his speech here, and you read about his security issues, there is revisionism, there is expansionism, there is a desire to move ahead. And the timelines are being compressed. The timelines are being compressed to say 2027. As what we read, it's no more 2049 or 2035. He wants the second centenary. So we have to watch out for next 5 years. We have to prepare ourselves. Even if there is diplomatic soft pedaling, okay, fine, so be it. That apart, we have to prepare ourselves to accept that by the time the next party conference 21st takes place, there would be a challenge which would be much mightier, and we have to prepare ourselves for that end. To look the bully in the eye is the only way to handle China.
But how do we look the bully in the eye, General Parthasarathi? Sorry, Ambassador Parthasarathi. You were a soldier, I remember, but now you are a diplomat.
I left the army as a major.
I know. So Major Parthasarathi se acha Ambassador Parthasarathi right now, because that is the avatar. But I am going to ask you this. Nobody is saying कि पाकिस्तान से हमें फर्क पड़ रहा है, General Sharma. The fact is that पाकिस्तान को prop कर रहे हैं so that हमको तकलीफ हो. It's like the pinprick which will irritate us. So that irritant is being done by two nations which do not want to. It is not in their interest to see India grow. India exercise its strategic autonomy or also establish itself as a separate identity which will deal with each nation as it feels. Because we've been talking about multipolarism. Sushantji, coming to you after Ambassador Parthasarathi. So what do we do, Ambassador Parthasarathi?
Let me say one thing. China cannot be equated with the US because China has a long-term view of using Pakistan as an instrument of strategic containment of India. Nowhere in the world and in no other country has one country provided a neighbor with designs of nuclear weapons, with designs of missiles which can hit everything from Delhi to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. This is their missiles. This is unprecedented. So, in the case of China, the focus is, as I said, very clear: containment of India and tying us down with a difficult Western neighbor. On the Western neighbor itself, I think General Bajwa has played it pretty smartly. He has got back into the American good books by what he's done in Ukraine. But please believe me, he will pay a price. The Russians have a very, very long memory. So yes, we live the Americans, as far as Biden is concerned, is quite different from, and he himself acknowledges it, from what Trump, or even Trump, who's regarded as an unreasonable man, behaved with India. This is long term. And I always tell some of my Indian friends, yes, we all love America, but we don't have to love Joe Biden and the likes of him. And quite rightly, the general has brought out the pretty old relations with Pakistan that he has. It's an unnecessary fascination, not with Pakistan, but the Pakistan military. So we are, I think, have to navigate this. And let me say, there is much one cannot say on television. But they have a good saying in Hindi, and get it from a good Madrasi in these days of linguism, कि हम भी दूध के धुले हुए नहीं हैं. So we know how to handle it. We won't talk about it in television, but that is it.
So you're saying that some plan is afoot. कुछ तो करेंगे, हम भी जवाब देंगे, करारा देंगे वो भी. But how we'll give, when we'll give, that like you said, time and place will be of our choosing. But Dr. Tarakarta, before I bring in Sushanji also, he's been wanting to come in. But yes, Dr. Tarakarta, what is it that we should do? Are we doing enough? Should we do whatever it is quietly behind the scenes? And should we look at it as road bumps, minor road bumps in the long road to what our strategic end game is?
Yeah, I think we are taking a slightly one-sided view. President Biden, as when he was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, had sponsored legislation which brought in the most stringent, control on distribution of aid. He said nothing to the Pakistani army, certification that the Pakistani army will not get money, that the Pakistani army is not going to interfere in political affairs of the state. So, and then if you recall, the Pakistani army brought out under General Kani, brought out a public statement. They were furious. So please remember, Biden knows his Pakistan. He's been in this business for years. I mean, I'm not saying he's an enemy of Pakistan. No, that is not how countries behave. But he knows his Pakistan, which is where his comment came from. Saying that, look, this is a country which is at a very dangerous stage because it's not cohesive, and it is not. The only binding factor was the Pakistan army, and that also seems to be sort of fighting between them and falling apart. But the trouble is, the Pakistanis will make money out of it, which is what has happened in the FATF. They've done this every time. They will produce this, quite sometimes real, instability, and then get money out of somebody or the other. This is what their diplomacy is about. And as for China, what we should do, I think we should say, why can't you say the East Turkestan Islamic movement is not a terrorist state? We withdraw from that. It's a UN resolution designating the East Turkestan movement. We said, no, we don't believe in that. Why don't we do something of the sort?
We are still verifying the existence of an ETIM, whether or not such an outfit really exists and whether or not such an outfit is really working against the interests of China. So we need more information and data on that. So we would like to make a move to block it. But the fact is that India doesn't enjoy that veto right now at UNSC. So we need to get to a position of being able to exercise that veto. Sushanji, yes.
Yeah. So just a couple of points. One, I don't think the pinpricks that come from Pakistan constrain our economic growth, our economic potential, even one little bit. This is the greatest myth in the world, Anand. In fact, our relations with Pakistan have gone steadily downhill from 1990. But look at the trajectory of development of both countries since that year, right? I think it's good policies that we make in India that will lead to our economic rejuvenation, our economic growth, rather than Pakistan. Pakistan, I agree with General Sharma that it's a complete nuisance. Its only value is its nuisance value. Number one. Number two, I think if we really want to carry forward our enmity countries, then we should do it the way enmity has to be done. This namby-pamby approach which we have, this typical, Hindustani kind of approach, Aadha Titar, Aadha Bater, it doesn't lead you anywhere. You end up caught between two stools. For example, you can pronounce any principle in the world. If the rest of the world does not follow those principles, what use those principles?
Correct.
When your turn comes, they are going to tear up your principles and shove them up wherever, right? So let's not get into that. On the one point where I'll challenge Mr. Parthasarathi, the Russians have a great memory. The Russians should have had a memory from the 1980s and what the Pakistanis did to them. But look at what Mr. Putin and his bunch, that horrible fellow Kabulov did. Both in Afghanistan as well as with Pakistan. So, these memory things are like principles. They are very fungible and they are very tradable. You remember memories when it suits you, you forget memories when it suits you. The Americans have done that. The Americans got shafted for 20 years and now are trying to go back to Pakistan because some of their interests are attached with Pakistan and they want to signal to India. But I don't think Pakistan any longer enjoys that geostrategic value which they keep tom-tomming about. They neither have any geo-economic value nor any geostrategic value. That damn CPEC which they were building is the biggest millstone around their neck and is putting them in the hawk to the Chinese like nothing else has. China is today Pakistan's largest lender, and the Chinese are squeezing them for every penny. They're not giving them even the slightest of concessions.
Right.
The West, on the other hand, is giving them debt waivers. They're giving them rescheduling the debt. The Chinese are not doing any such thing. They keep postponing their debt. They don't take it back, but they just keep rolling it over. They're not forgiving any debt. They're not forgiving any interest. Nothing. They're asking them to pay for all the services for which they have. The Pakistanis have got their investments. So there is a lot going for us, provided we look at things in a very clinical manner, in a very surgical manner. We don't attach any kind of values or any kind of these hoary principles of the past to things. We do things in our interest. We do things in a very, very systematic manner, rather than and the moment somebody tells you Vasudeva Kutumbakam, just switch off, man. The guy doesn't know anything about international relations. I'm telling you this. They neither know anything about Indian mythology.
The whole idea is that the world is one family, but the family runs. I am the Karta. I am the Karta of the family. That means India is the Karta of the family. That means India would, it will be on the values that India would want to dictate. So that would be perhaps the caveat there. I respect where.
Just one sentence.
Since
when has Vasudeva Kutumbakam become India's value? The phrase comes from a story of a scorpion and a frog, right? Where the scorpion stings the frog by first misleading the frog by talking about Vasudeva Kutumbakam.
Right.
So what are we talking about? The world is not a family. We should not treat it like a family, and we should forget these things. And
we can espouse some values that we would want to aspire to have, whether it's a reality or not. It's okay. It's a different matter. We leave that debate. We leave that debate for another day. I've got Sushantji charged up, but I'll park it there. Sushantji, I have run out of time. Ambassador Parthasarathi, Sushant Sareen, Dr. Tara Karta and General Sharma. Thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if we are an economic power, if we have the economic might and clout, then we can dictate terms and tell nations to back off when they try and impinge on our interests and our sovereignty. Is dharmic capitalism that route? Stay tuned to find out as we speak with Sriram Balasubramanian, the author of Kautilionomics.
For performing his grandfather's last rites. After the video went viral, both the accused were arrested. A brawl on a moving train ended in horror in West Bengal's Birbhum district.
Two passengers came to blows on the Howrah-Malda Town Intercity Express. The fight started after one of the men allegedly abused and threatened other passengers on the train. After a few minutes, the two men disengage, but the verbal argument continues. Soon after, the round two of the confrontation begins. But this time, the man shoves the passenger off the moving train. He shows absolutely no remorse and returns to his seat. The passenger who was thrown off the train was later rescued from the tracks by the railway police. He's being treated for his injuries at a hospital. The man who threw him off the train has been arrested. Police is probing if others are involved.
A massive row has erupted at an exam center in Telangana's Adilabad. The BJP claims that some Hindu women were asked to remove their jewellery, including their Mangal Sutra, before entering the hall. But Muslim women were allowed to enter with burqas on. The Adilabad SP claims the rules were followed and that there was no discrimination. The Tamil Nadu government is mulling legal options after the Justice Arumugaswamy Commission recommended a probe into Shashikala's role in the death of former Chief Minister Jayalalitha. Shashikala, on her part, has refuted all the allegations, saying that she never interfered in Jayalalitha's medical treatment. Heavy rains continue to lash Pune, leaving the city completely inundated.
In many parts of the city, vehicles were left submerged. This two-wheeler was washed away due to strong floodwaters. People were forced to walk in chest-deep water to get to their destination. The floodwaters also entered the railway station, causing panic on the ground. Even hospitals were left inundated after incessant rains. Pune is witnessing its heaviest rain since 2011. And the Met Department has predicted that there will be no let-up in the weather till the 22nd of October.
After 4 years, Pakistan has been taken off the Financial Action Task Force's grey list. It was initially put on the list for deficiencies in counter-terror financing and anti-money laundering regimes. This was back in 2018. The decision was taken after a quote-unquote verification visit by members of the FATF. Russian President Vladimir Putin has declared martial law in 4 regions of Ukraine that were recently annexed: Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson. With the announcement of martial law, Putin has said that more emergency powers will be given to the heads of all of these regions. British Prime Minister Liz Truss has insisted that she will not quit as Prime Minister as she faced tough questions from booing MPs during her first question time session since abandoning her tax-slashing economic policies and since sacking her finance minister. As chants of gone, a defiant Liz Truss said that she's a fighter and not a quitter. Several Conservative Party MPs have already publicly called for Liz Truss to be replaced. And we leave you with King Charles's hilarious response to a child who asked him his age.
Depends on which like sometimes
Right
it's
here
week
to
and
a half
sometimes
term
it's
next week. You get 2 weeks. You can have a guess. You get a decent summer holiday right there.
Very nice, thank you.
very nice. Thank you very much.
You very much needed it as well.
An 80-kilogram python was rescued from a school bus in Uttar Pradesh's Raebareli district.
The 11-feet-long python was found inside the engine of the empty school bus. Forest Department officials were called in to rescue the python. They tied a rope around the snake and tried to pull it out, but the giant reptile clung on to the bus's engine. Finally, after an hour, an official managed to pry the snake free from its hold. The loud cheers broke out among the onlookers who were watching the operation with horror and excitement. Later, the python was safely released in the forest of Dalmau.
A 12-year-old boy was made to dangle from the roof of a well in Madhya Pradesh's Chhatarpur district. He was accused of stealing a mobile phone. The boy clung to the sides of the well, claiming innocence and begging for his life as a man threatened to drop him down. The accused was arrested after the police filed a case for culpable homicide under the SCST Act. A 22-year-old man was tied to a two-wheeler and made to run for about 2 kilometers on a busy road in Cuttack in Odisha. This was his punishment for allegedly failing to repay 1,500 rupees which he had borrowed from one of the 2 accused for performing his grandfather's last rites. After the video went viral, both the accused were arrested. A brawl on a moving train ended in horror in West Bengal's Birbhum district.
Two passengers came to blows on the Howrah-Malda Town Intercity Express. The fight.
Well, it's yet another interesting conversation with an author who said that it's time for Bharat to take the right stand in terms of its economics, and it's all based on research, and we have to go back into our past. And he asked a very simple question. Why is it for more than a millennia, this was the region and this was the land that everybody looked to as they envied the economic prosperity of this land, the land with golden wealth, sone ki chidiya. This concept, does this emerge out of a practice put in place by a man who all of us knows for different reasons, and that's Kautilya. And this is the book Kautilionomics, and the author Sriram Balasubramanian is with me right here. So Sriram, namaste and thank you very much. So let's start with the fact that first is that for someone like Bibek Debroyji to write the foreword means that there is a lot of meat in the book and it derives merit. But Kautilionomics, where did this evolve?
Thanks, Anand, for providing me this opportunity. Glad that you like the book. And of course, thanks to Bibek as well for the beautiful foreword. As you mentioned, the fact that 1,000 years of prosperity, and which we are all aware of, the intriguing thought was when I was working on Angus Maddison, a world-renowned economic historian's data set, which illustrates the GDP data during this period. So my intuitive understanding was there had to be some sort of an economic framework based on which this prosperity happened, something prior to Common Era. That's when I chanced upon the Arthashastra. And I realized that very little was written about the Artha and the Arthashastra.
Arthashastra. No, we call economics in Hindi as Arthashastra.
Right.
That's the term for, but we don't understand the Artha behind or meaning behind Arthashastra. But why economic history?
Yeah, because the fact that there was such a prosperous time had to be triggered by some sort of an economic framework. It doesn't happen by accident, was my intuitive understanding. And then when I chanced upon the text, I realized that much of the discussion has been on the sort of political side, the Chanakya Niti side, or the discussion has been on things like self-help books or fiction books. But where is the Artha and Arthashastra? Again, that question kept coming back to me. And that's when I sort of probed and through a very long process proposed a sort of an economic framework for Kautilya's ideas. That was challenging because you had to first understand the dense text, the Sanskritam text, and then understand the economics/finance of the text, and then contextualize it for today's times. So it's a sort of a three-stage process.
So you had to first learn Sanskritam.
That's right.
Then understand the meaning of what's written in Sanskritam.
Right.
Then contextualize it to modern day economics and the way things are working now. And then try and draw parallels. There is a reason why this book, ladies and gentlemen, right now is the bestseller as far as economic history is concerned. It's gone into a reprint already.
That's right.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Someone's got his economics right, if I may say that. But good luck to you on that. But there is a lot of information, I must say. And this means that there has to be a lot of research that was done. So how many years of research has gone into this book?
Well, about 4 to 5 years, to be honest, because the first part of what you said is right. You had to learn Sanskritam. I already had some knowledge of Sanskritam. But more important is I'm not a scholar. So you had to deal with Sanskritam scholars and engage with them, try to understand the way the text is structured, use techniques which we are not probably privy to, which scholars are, and then use their knowledge to sort of, blend it with say, what I bring to the table, for example, with economics and finance, and then create a framework. And that framework should be illustrated to the current audience. So it's a coalition of all these things. So it took about 4 to 5 years to sort of get this, all these 3 pillars right. And eventually I'm happy that the output has shaped up well. But there's a lot of work behind it, you're right. So.
No, and that work shows. It's quite dense, ladies and gentlemen, but it's also easy to understand because you've also put in a lot of tables, graphs, in terms of comparison of notes. But let me ask you, you're not the first person to write on Chanakya. You're not the first person to explore Kautilya, his thoughts, and even on the economic part. So how are you different from the others?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I mean, I didn't write it to be different. I wrote it because of the curiosity I had, which I just mentioned. And I found surprisingly that no one had dealt with it. So it sort of, fell into the jigsaw, as you call it. But I think the difference here is you exactly mentioned there are three types of audiences that this book tries to cater to. One is the Indic / mythological audience who are very keen on our culture and our ancient past. Another is sort of the economic / finance audience who are also keen on something ancient. Another is the common reader, right? So the book had to cater to each of them and ensure that it's not diluted for either of them. Which means each of these experts shouldn't feel that it's short in their sort of area of expertise. So that was a very thin line which I had to sort of navigate, and that's why it required a lot of rigor, and it's sometimes dense.
Yeah, it is.
And
I had to go back and read a few passages to understand and to try and actually make sense. But like you said, it's all about Bharat, but different ways of people who want to look and understand Bharat. So you have those who are into Sabhyata and Samskriti of Bharat. There are those who want to understand the cultural ethos and of course the civilizational richness and somewhere the economics comes in. And those who are just trying to say, hey, what is this guy saying and is there something for me to learn with respect to principles of economics? Please.
Yeah, and just one point there is that, there is also, I have to thank my publisher for this because, though I have written for many publications before, there are quite a few publishers who wanted it sort of diluted a bit. But I was insistent that, that the Bharatiya audience are more than capable of handling complex content. In fact, my feeling was that, people embrace complex content nowadays. So the more, the feedback that I received on the book is amazing. There are people who have read it twice. There are people who have reviewed it twice, and they're learning more about it. So I think the notion that readers somehow do not like complex content, I think in today's age is a misnomer. I think as long as the content there is rigor, there's analytical rigor, and there's a curiosity among people, there is always an audience.
Yeah. More importantly, if the facts lead to a deduction, and you're driving the audience, and you're at the outset you say that you are not saying that this is right. You are just presenting the facts to say, is this possible and can we deduce that this is the way forward? So let me ask you, this is a phenomenal idiom or a phrase that you've got, which is the sara of this book, that is dharmic capitalism. And I fell in love with this whole concept itself because you are saying that, and correct me if I'm wrong because that's my understanding, that welfare is intrinsic to the creation of wealth. So if I were to say, traditionally India did well because the Rajas or the kings were supposed to create wealth so that nobody in the praja, among the praja, went hungry. So it was welfare for all. Have I understood that this is where you are coming from and this is possible? Because you are saying socialism and capitalism were woven together under dharmic capitalism. Please.
Yeah. In the context of Kautilya, since that is what the subject is about, my view of what Kautilya thought was, between the state and the market, just sort of a binary, with which it's sort of a levers that we use. The state, for example, if there's any movement by the state in terms of infrastructure spending, taxation, these are some levers that you use when the economy is evolving. The same thing with the market, right? So Kautilya felt that dharma could play a role of self-correcting both of them. And the fact that, for example, if there's corruption in the state, then the role of dharma could be an enabler to reduce the amount of corruption. The same thing with the market. So that way it sort of liberates both the state and the market, and sort of the burden in that sense goes on dharma, on dharmic values. But it also helps to sort of have a more sustainable foundation to economic prosperity. So I, for example, define Kautilya's classification on ethics, responsibilities, and a sort of a global approach, because he was open to international trade. As we are all aware, international trade was probably pretty prominent during Kautilya's time, and so he had a very broad worldview for someone thousands of years ago. So in that sense, my interpretation is that the idea of dharmic capitalism, not that it needs to be defined through the prism of capitalism, but given that some of the contours in today's times are around that verbiage, the idea basically presents dharma at the center of it, and that is sort of the foundation of Kautilya's sort of worldview.
So dharma means you need to have a certain value system that drives your economic policies, or that there will be a certain, you define dharma as duties, value system, or a code which will define the economic principles on which the country will run.
Yeah, so that's again a challenge, right? We define dharma in thousands of ways.
Yes.
I mean, we have these discussions at home, whether it's spiritual or otherwise, right? For the practical purposes of this book, if you had noticed, I sort of define it into 3 buckets. One is on the role of ethics, in terms of institutions, transparency, in terms of credible institutions, and the role of ethics in all of this. And then the other bucket is on responsibilities, societal responsibilities, environmental responsibilities, the idea of sustainability and things like that. And then the third is the what we call as the lokakshema, I mean, the broader world, happiness, and the role of, say, harmony and Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam as a concept.
Correct.
And how does that sort of have an internationalist approach? So these are 3 sort of buckets which, I segment dharma into, and that's my interpretation of Kautilya. Having said that, I mean, like you mentioned, the main purpose of the book is to get this thing to be debated, right? Can you imagine that we talk so much about Kautilya, but very little about what his, economic philosophy could be? So we could have a situation after, say, reading this multiple times and looking at the translations again, that we could define dharma in other ways.
Yeah.
And then have probably a different approach or different analytical view of what Kautilya is thinking. So in that sense, it is still, kindles my curiosity, I would say.
True, you do, and it's interesting. I'll be honest with you, I've not got up to page 237, but I stumbled upon this, ladies and gentlemen. I'm halfway through the book, and I'm going to complete it soon. That's a promise, Sriram. But here you've put out a table. Now this table encapsulates the key insights. Now this itself shows how much work has gone through it. But when you say the philosophy of dharmic capitalism and you define it, you say dharmic capitalism through a rule-based yet non-intrusive state, wealth creation and sustainable growth and welfare. Somewhere on the lines of what Prime Minister Modi says, minimum government, maximum governance, if you were to loosely put it there. But then you also turn around and say ease of trade, internal trade between states or kingdoms. So now, which is no longer riyasats or kingdoms, but it's states. And export diversification along with tariff management. You talked about sustainability. So you say that a holistic approach towards sustainable development which encompasses societal, environmental and familial responsibilities. So now you're saying that it's going to be a comprehensive umbrella where every action, you will also think about the repercussions at various levels. So that's where the dharma comes in, the dharma aspect comes in.
That's right. I mean, in my view, what we had done thus far on Kautilya is that you had looked, many scholars have looked at the text, at their own sort of, added their own perspectives. But what you need is subject matter experts looking at each of these components, because Kautilya has a very multi-dimensional personality.
Yeah.
Right? There are 15 chapters, there are about 6,000 slokas in the book. So the chapters deal with law and justice, chapters deal with, the economy, it deals with the state and things like that. And there are a lot of these concepts which sort of intertwine everywhere else. So the attempt really here is to sort of take that, look at all these angles and then illustrate through some of the pointers that you mentioned and then provide the thinking behind Kautilya. What we are, I think, missing thus far is the conceptual underpinning, the thought process of Kautilya, which I attempt to extract. And that's where, the idea of sustainability, because he talks a lot about societal responsibility, protecting the environment. He talks about the need to protect, say, forest and in those days, and the need for, a state which is, because often the criticism with Kautilya is that, it's sort of a socialistic state, which I sort of push back in the book. Because my view is that it's a very organized state. An organized state, but it doesn't really micromanage your activities. For example, there might be X, Y, Z rules and regulations in the Arthashastra, but it doesn't tell you how much quantity of, say, trade that you need to do between X and Z or A and B at any point of time, in my view. So it's an organized state. And another point is, everything in the Arthashastra doesn't necessarily mean to be implemented. It's sort of a template. And in that sense, I think Kautilya has sort of made it context agnostic. You won't find, for example, mentions of the Mauryan kingdom or what components of the Mauryan kingdom any kingdom needs to do, right? So he sort of became wanted this to be a context agnostic document. So in all likelihood, depending on the circumstances, he could pick and choose some of these pieces that he wants to implement as policy. So I think we have to also give him that freedom of, doubt rather than,
You repeatedly underline the concept of a non-intrusive state. It's rule-based, but it's non-intrusive, and that's what you expounded on. Now, final question to you. How do we take this forward into the Amrit Kal? What can Bharat do to learn from Kautilya? And can we actually, in this current geopolitical situation, move to a platform of dharmic capitalism, a thought process? Because economics is driving the world to war. It's driving prime ministers to resign in 45 days. It's pushing a lot of things. The underlying aspect is all economics at all levels, if you were to see. So for Bharat, which is looking at its Amrit Kal of growth, how can we get onto dharmic capitalism? Can we actually do it?
Yeah, that's a fair question, right? I think the idea of the book is to sort of put Kautilya's ideas on the table and then see what is applicable. I think we are sensible enough to understand that obviously there are established systems today which are far more refined in terms of data and content, and we moved ahead a lot. But eventually we are still human beings, and human beings and interactions based on human beings have a certain sort of an ethos behind it, which I think that's where Kautilya's ideas could come into play. So I think what Kautilya's ideas could help us is, because there's always a gap between what the policies try to implement and what the people actually in their own cultural, societal norms do in terms of activities. So I think this idea of Kautilya's ideas could sort of help to bridge the gaps. And on specific policy issues, you could use some of his ideas to further ensure that there is greater efficiency of some of these policies so that people adapt it more. So I think it's up to debate. I mean, the last chapter, for example, penultimate chapter, I talk about what are some of the future issues.
Right.
And I myself ask questions because I myself, I'm still contemplating on what Kautilya would have thought. So I think this is a good template for people to think about, and I'm pretty sure it'll be useful for many scholars to sort of and policymakers to look at it in the future.
Well, absolutely, and I think for all of us to think about a little more and know a little more in terms of civilizationally understand that if your fundamentals economically are good, then you have a nation that will prosper. So you've got to get that basis right. And might is what is respected, and it's purely economic heft. And can we do it with an element of dharma? Well, that's what this book talks about. So congratulations on that, Sriram. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Welcome to Brass Tacks. I'm Zaka Jacob. A massive debate has been stirred recently. First, it was by RSS Sarsang Chalak Mohan Bhagwat in his Vijayadashmi speech, calling for a comprehensive population control policy. And this was later backed up by his second-in-command, Dattatreya Hosbale, who said that population demographics are changing rapidly in the border districts because of illegal immigration and because of religious conversion. Now, there are many on the other side, including the likes of Asaduddin Owaisi, who are saying and challenging this presupposition. Is there merit in the argument that there is a population imbalance, particularly in the border districts? And if so, on what basis is that argument based? The Muslim fertility rate in this country is marginally higher than the Hindu fertility rate, and it is falling, like is the case for all other communities. So where is this fear coming from? And if in the border districts this is significantly changing, does that then make the case for a national register of citizens to know who is Indian, who has been here for a number of generations, and who has come recently? But all of that in a moment. First, the story of the day.
हमारे देश में कन्वर्शन होने से, मतांतरण होने से कई जगह पर संख्या हिंदुओं की कम होती है।
RSS General Secretary Dattatreya Hosbale making a pitch for a uniform national policy on population control. He claims that religious conversions and infiltration across borders are triggering a demographic imbalance in the country.
आने वाले वर्षों में बच्चों के युवकों की संख्या कम होकर बूढ़ों की संख्या के अनुपात ज़्यादा होने की संभावना आने वाले 30 वर्षों में 40 वर्षों में। बांग्लादेश से उत्तर बिहार के राज्यों में आप पूर्णिया कटिहार वगैरह देखेंगे या नॉर्थ ईस्ट में देखेंगे, यही इसी के लिए आंदोलन भी हुआ था वहाँ। अब थोड़ा सा उसको रोकने का प्रयास वहाँ तो हुआ, लेकिन अन्य राज्यों में भी वो धीरे धीरे बढ़ने के सभी प्रकार के अनुभव आए हैं।
Dattatreya Hosable's remarks come just a few weeks after RSS chief Mohan Bhagwat, who said that religion-based population imbalance can't be ignored.
हम आज डेमोग्राफिक डिविडेंड की स्थिति में है कि जनसंख्या में प्रमाण का भी संतुलन चाहिए। आज की तारीख में यह असंतुलन जन्मदर एक भाग है उसका, लेकिन जोर जबरदस्ती या छल कपट से, लालच से मतांतरण, ये सबसे बड़ा फैक्टर है।
But many opposition parties have objected to the RSS's views, calling it an election gimmick for the BJP.
8 साल से तो आप ही की सरकार है, आप ही के इशारे पर चलने वाली सरकार है। इसके पहले भी 6-7 साल रह चुकी, अटल जी की 3 सरकारें रह चुकी, तब क्यों कुछ नहीं किया?
According to the National Family Health Survey, the total fertility rate has been decreasing in India, and every religious group has seen a fall in the total fertility rate, including the Muslim population. Although the rate of fertility is the highest among Muslims, it has been steadily declining over the years. So are the claims of a religion-based population imbalance factual, or is it simply fear-mongering?
Right, on the talking point this evening here on Brass Tacks, we have a full panel here in our studios. Ashwini Upadhyay is senior advocate in the Supreme Court. In fact, he has lodged a PIL on this population matter in the court. Geeta Bhatt, academic, joining us. Waris Pathan is national spokesperson of the MIM party. Shahid Ali is an advocate and leader of the United Muslim Front. And Nandita Saikia is from the Indian Institute of Population Sciences in Mumbai. Ashwini Upadhyay, let me start with you. You have in fact put up a PIL in the Supreme Court. The data from the National Family Health Survey shows that India's population of Muslims rose from 10% in 1951 to 14.2% in 2011. The total fertility rate, TIFR, of Muslim population is 2.24, of the Hindu population is 1.9. If the gap is so small, then where is this fear coming from, Mr. Upadhyay, कि मुस्लिम की आबादी जो है ज़्यादा बढ़ रही है और हिंदुओं की आबादी कम हो रही है?
देखिए, अगर गैप बिल्कुल ठीक है, पॉपुलेशन ऑफ TFR कम हो चुका है, सब लोग कंडोम भी यूज़ कर रहे हैं, बाकी और मेजर्स ले रहे हैं, तो फिर तो सबको एक साथ कहना चाहिए, भाई आप जो है यूनिफॉर्म पॉपुलेशन कोड ले आइए, पॉपुलेशन कंट्रोल बनाइए, हम दो हमारे दो लागू करिए, कोई फ़र्क ही नहीं पड़ेगा। इस 2 चाइल्ड पॉलिसी का, हम दो हमारे दो का हिंदू स्वागत कर रहे हैं, किसी क्रिश्चियंस ने इसका अपोज किया नहीं, पारसी ने अपोज किया नहीं, बहाई ने अपोज किया नहीं, यहूदी ने अपोज किया नहीं, जैन ने अपोज किया नहीं, बौद्ध ने अपोज किया नहीं। एक ही सेगमेंट तो है, एक ही तबका है, एक ही पॉलिटिकल पार्टी है, एक ही फिरका है जो बार बार विरोध कर रहा है। इसका मतलब दाल में कुछ काला है। इसका मतलब TFR जो है वो, अगर वो TFR ठीक है, पॉपुलेशन हो तो सबको स्वागत कर लेना चाहिए था। फैक्ट इसमें प्रॉब्लम कहाँ से हो रही है?
नहीं, बट अश्विनी जी, ये TFR तो वारिस पठान साहब बैठे हैं, उनके पार्टी ने नहीं तय किया ना। TFR तो मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ हेल्थ तय कर सकती है, नेशनल फैमिली हेल्थ सर्वे जो है उसी में से ये TFR तय हुआ ना। वारिस पठान इज आल्सो सिटिंग हियर।
जक्का साहब अगर कोई चोरी नहीं कर रहा है तो आप चोरी करने वाले को फांसी का कानून बना दो, क्या फर्क पड़ेगा? अगर कोई रेड लाइट नहीं तोड़ रहा है तो रेड लाइट तोड़ने पे आप 1 लाख रुपए जुर्माना लगा दो, क्या फर्क पड़ेगा?
ओके,
इसलिए तो मैं कह रहा हूं, अगर वो जो जिस सर्वे की बात हो रही है वो बिल्कुल ठीक है, प्रैक्टिकली वास्तव में डाउन हो रहा है। ये जो TFR वगैरह डाउन हो रहा है, मैं आपको बता दूं, केवल हिंदुओं के कारण, जैन्स के कारण, इसके कारण ये TFR डाउन हुआ है। वास्तव में आज भी केरल जैसे वेल एजुकेटेड, जिसको हम कहते हैं लिटरेट स्टेट, वहां पे भी 15-15 बच्चे, 16-16 बच्चे पैदा कर रहे हैं। मैं आपको एग्जांपल दे सकता हूं।
एक सेकंड दीजिए, वारिस पठान, you know, the issue that's been flagged especially by Dattatreya Hosbale is that in the border districts, and he specifically talked about northern Bihar, where your party also made inroads last time. In northern Bihar, the total population growth that was recorded was 198.71% between 1961 and 2011 in the last 50 years. the data shows that in these 5 decades, the rate of growth of Hindu population was 185% and the rate of growth of Muslim population was 273%. In the Simanchal area, I just want to read, in Supol, 365% growth in the last 50 years. In Araria, 340%. In Kishanganj, 295%. So there is some merit in the argument that in certain districts, certain border districts, the rate of growth of Muslim population has been astronomical.
Well, Zaka, I fail to understand on what basis and what source the data they are placing before the nation. And what is the basis for the RSS chief and today Dattatreya making a statement that there is a population explosion and there is a demographic imbalance in the country. I fail to understand that, but the data which I have
Sir,
got
this is census data. Census data. Government of India data. I am not inventing the data, sir. Sir, just one small
I am showing that only.
Census data hai.
Me, even I have not invented any data. I will place before I place some facts before your audience, Zaka. Let them understand what the reality is.
Okay.
The reality as per the NFHS data is that the population explosion is merely a myth. There is no population explosion and they are just trying to create a panic out of it. The second thing, let me tell you, fertility rate among Muslims, the largest minority, is the highest among all major communities but has been declining fast. It's now almost equal to that of Hindus according to this PEW Research Center. From 1992 to 2015, Muslim fertility rate declined from 4.4 to 2.6. For Hindus, it went down from 3.3 to 2.1. This is the data.
Let's go a little detail into the data. The issue is, you're right, the overall for the entire country, yes, you're right, the Muslim total fertility rate is 2.6%. The issue is, it is different in different states in the country. In Jammu and Kashmir, for example, it is less than 2. It is 1.6 or 1.7, which means the population is not replenishing itself enough. It has to be 2 or 2 plus or 2.1 for the population to replenish. So there are states, Muslim majority parts of this country where the population is falling. But in places like Simanchal, in places in some of the districts in Northeast, in districts bordering Bangladesh in Bengal, the rate of growth of Muslim population is very, very high. And I'm not saying that it's merely because of reproduction or procreation. It could also be because of illegal migration.
Bangladeshi Rohingyas.
Allow me just 30 seconds, Zaka. Let me remind you, in 2019, the BJP's Rajya Sabha member of parliament, Rakesh Sinha, had moved a private member's bill for population control. It was signed by 12 or 13 of the MPs. During that time, Mansukh Mandavia, who was the minister, he stood up and he made a statement in the parliament that there is no need to bring a population control bill because the fertility TFR rate has come down. There is no population explosion. Not only that, the matter went to the Honorable Supreme Court. The government of that day, the Health Ministry, filed an affidavit before the Supreme Court stating that the population is in control, there is no population explosion, and the TFR rate is down, and the replacement rate is already achieved.
Okay.
So why now they come up with this
So let
kind
me
of
ask
thing?
this.
So
I think that's a fair point. It's a fact. What you have said.
Or they give false statement on the parliament.
Let me get Geeta Bhatt.
Both the things they are lying before the nation.
Let me ask Geeta Bhatt. This is what Health Minister Mansukh Mandavia had said as recently as April this year in the budget session of Parliament, replying to a discussion on a private member's bill brought forth by BJP MP Rakesh Sinha. It was called the Population Regulation Bill 2019, where Mansukh Mandavia specifically said that since the TFR across the country, across demographics, across population groups is falling, there is no need for any population control law. Healthcare policies are working, and there is no need to make these policies compulsory on any segment of the population. This is what the Health Minister said in Parliament. Please respond, ma'am.
Well, Zaka, you see, the Health Minister's response, keeping that aside, what is important here to note is that, when Dattatreya ji raised this issue, it is something which we can see in the data that you also have just cited. The point here is that the demographic change, this is something that we as a country have also experienced, and there are many such examples across the globe where the demographic changes, they have altered the culture, religion and the geographical boundaries of the regions. keeping that in mind and the national security, while it is not just in terms of the total fertility rate, but also along with it the kind of the conversions and the infiltration that is taking place. And for this, there have been many reports, especially which have been submitted by the Uttar Pradesh government, and also Assam government has flagged this issue. In
No,
Uttar
but
Pradesh,
ma'am,
there
in
are
both of these
1,000
states that you
villages
cited,
which are
ma'am, give me 10
water
seconds, give me 10 seconds. Geeta ji, in both the states that you cited, UP maybe or Assam maybe, there is a very stringent anti-conversion law. उसके बावजूद अगर conversion हो रहा है तो then that's on the state, no?
No. See, if you look, about out of the 1,000 villages which are near in the border area of Uttar Pradesh, out of this, in 600 villages, the Muslim population is more than 50%, right?
Okay.
And it is also those who are there residing, whether they are the natural inhabitants of the place or those who have actually crossed the border and come. It is something that needs to be looked into, and that is why whenever there have been issues which have been raised or policies which have been framed by the government in terms of NRC or in CAA, there is a hue and cry by a certain.
No. I'll come to the NRC argument in 1 second. Let me ask Shahid Ali also. One example that is oftentimes cited is that of Bangladesh. Bangladesh today, the fertility rate is down to less than 2 or less than 2. It is below the replacement level. Like I said, the replacement level has to be 2.1 for the TFR. Now, everybody is citing the Bangladesh example because of their population control measures over the last 30-40 years. Per capita income growth has grown high in Bangladesh, where today it is said that the per capita income growth in Bangladesh is higher than that of India. If a Muslim country, an Islamic republic like Bangladesh, can and do population control successfully, then why can't we here in India, sir? Shahid Ali.
Sir, the government in power is of BJP for last 8 years. When sterilization program was announced by the then Congress in 1970, who opposed that? Only the Jan Sangh had opposed that at the time in 1970. If that would not have been opposed, the population would not have increased to this extent. The government is not coming forward to say that we are not able to provide education, we are not able to provide unemployment, therefore they are raising this issue of this population and all. Whereas you yourself have been making a statement, Mr. Ashwani.
There are 100 different problems in this country.
There is a statement of Health Minister as well.
There are 100 different problems in this country. I'm not denying. But please, आप आज मुद्दे पे बात कीजिए ना. The issue today, the debate today is on population control.
Yes.
Is there a need for a population control bill? उस मुद्दे पे बात कीजिए.
The reason assigned by the RSS and the other outfits is that in bordering states, in some of the districts, the population is increasing. So that's why I want to say that population is increasing only in those areas where no education could have been provided, no employment could have been provided by the government. So the impact of non-education and non-employment is the population increasement.
Sir. No. Look, I'm not a statistician. But to say, no. एक second. बात सुनिए, शाही साहब. It cannot be that level of primary enrollment amongst Muslims is only low in the border districts. Level of primary school enrollment among Muslims is low across the country. There is data to show that. To say that lack of education in border districts, that's why population is increasing in those border districts, I think it's a disingenuous argument. Sorry. Ashwani.